So the ecosystem, ladies and gentlemen, the ecosystem of corporate mobility is vast and large. And so it will be good to have a look at the corporate mobility offering today. What kind of mobility solutions are where in the development, and what can we expect in the near future? To unravel the corporate mobility offering that exists today with insights about who delivers what, we have found for you a true expert. Shwetha Surender is Director New Mobility at Frost & Sullivan, and I already had the pleasure at previous events to watch her presenting, and I can already tell you that it will be very inspiring with a lot of knowledge and a lot of insights. So I'm really great that I can announce now Shwetha to the audience. Shwetha, hello, welcome.
Thank you, Stephen.
How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Good. Shwetha, we already saw this morning that mobility managers, they have some expectations when it comes to the fleet suppliers. Mm-hmm. They would like also some developments regarding seamless mobility based on digital platforms, and they would like to have, let's say, more tangible solutions that are easier to implement. So it will be interesting to learn from you how the mobility ecosystem is built up and what you see as important developments. So in the upcoming 20 minutes, you will picture the mobility offering that exists today. And if at the end we have time for some Q&A, we will, of course, ask you the questions that the participants can submit via the chat function. Okay?
Sounds perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So I will now stop sharing my screen so that you can start sharing yours. This is always easier. Okay. So you can do that now.
Okay. You should be able to see my screen, and I'm going to pull up.
Indeed. Yes.
Right.
That's perfect. Yes.
All right.
That's really perfect. So I will now put my camera off. That full attention is for you. Shwetha, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Stephen. So as we just discussed in this presentation today, we're going to have a look at the advancements that we're seeing in corporate mobility. And we'll also start deep diving into the various services that are emerging across this ecosystem and really driving this growth. So let me take a step back to begin with and try and break down what the market shift is. As we see it, traveling and commuting have always been a very, very big part of people's lives. Now, in the short to mid-term, it is expected that a larger proportion of the people could potentially work remotely, which will again cause big shifts in the type of mobility demand that comes through. Hybrid working could mean less trips per week, which would impact public transport occupancy levels. It could lead to unpredictable change in demand altogether. On the other hand, if we are to assume that people will go back to full-time work on site, similar to what it was pre-COVID, commuters will face the challenges of congestion, pollution, air quality, and the like. So what is becoming very clear is that regardless of how demand changes, the traditional model of car usage, including company cars, is likely to become less attractive. There will be a greater demand for flexibility, sustainability, and cost effectiveness. And this is something that has been echoed through the previous presentations as well that we've seen today. Now, what we are starting to see and what we'll explore in greater detail today in this presentation is the fact that a number of stakeholders who offer on-demand mobility, who offer MaaS solutions, who offer integrated mobility solutions, are starting to enter the corporate mobility space to tap into this emerging opportunity. The next slide that I have really gives an overview of the key mobility solutions that we see that will start to play a pivotal role in shaping the corporate mobility market of the future. Now, what's interesting is that almost all the shared mobility business models have providers who have started tailoring their solutions for the B2B space. So most of the solutions for the B2B space are built on SaaS applications that companies can customize for their employees. So scaling up is proving to be much easier than anticipated. Now we'll look at each of these solutions in great detail in the following slides. The first solution that we want to deep dive into is micromobility. Now, micromobility includes services like cycling, like e-scooters, e-bikes, and so on. Now, looking at the market as a whole, not necessarily focused on corporate mobility, we've seen a boom in micromobility over the last year and a half. For example, if you take cycling, it's been promoted in a big way in several cities. We've seen investment in new cycling paths, encouraging people to shift from bikes to bikes away from cars. And additionally, during the pandemic, micromobility started again growing significantly because it is compatible with social distancing norms. It allows people to travel safely, traveling in open space and fresh air with limited human contact. And so we saw millions of commuters across Europe turning to micromobility, particularly cycling, e-scooters. We saw this trend happen across North America. We saw it in other parts of the world, even the APAC region. And there's some very interesting statistics coming out. So for instance, in China, they found that a larger proportion of the people who had turned to cycling started replacing trip lengths of over 3 kilometers with cycling as a mode share. And this means that effectively the shift away from, it would have typically been from public transport or it would have been from personal car to cycle, is likely to be a permanent shift. So corporate micromobility as well has benefited from this overall trend that we're seeing. As a business model in this segment, it is fairly new. However, we're starting to see a lot of traction in this segment. Now, under the aegis of corporate mobility, micromobility, there are 3 key business models we see. The first is the membership-based business model that allows you to access the micromobility fleet annually. The second is a pay-as-you-go model that builds you on a usage-based system. And the last is an extended rental program. We're starting to see leasing companies like ALD, for instance, come into the space. So ALD started offering e-bike solutions in Brazil, specifically targeted at corporate mobility. Other players like Lime and Tier, for instance, offer corporate access for e-scooters. And we expect this segment to continue to evolve, driven by the adoption of e-bikes, e-scooters, and electrification, technology advancements like big data and AI that really are enhancing mobility deployment efficiencies. The next model that we look at is corporate car sharing. Now, corporate car sharing is quite advantageous because it can enable larger organizations to reduce or eliminate altogether the private vehicle fleets by providing their employees access to exclusive use car share vehicles, giving them a high level of flexibility. For small businesses as well, this solution can be adapted. They can make use of shared fleets to provide their employees with added mobility options for work. And if companies have their own fleets in-house, they can just license the technology platform and use it to roll out corporate car share solutions with the in-house fleets. Now, this is a business model that in truth has been around for a while. However, historically, the uptake rates has not been very substantial. This is starting to change though. And again, a lot of the growth honestly can be attributed to the pandemic and the fact that it's led to changes in the way we work. So in addition to mobility challenges, liability challenges as well are a big concern for employers. For instance, having employees being exposed to potentially the virus in public transport or being exposed while they're commuting into work is a concern that's starting to weigh on people's minds. And giving them access to solutions like corporate car sharing could help allay some of these concerns. So companies are starting to employ car sharing as a transport demand management tool, as well as a public parking management tool, reducing the needs for employees to drive into work by offering them mobility on site. This realistically reduces the employees' reliance on private vehicles for commuting, allowing them to use alternative modes, while retaining on-demand mobility for work-related travel and meetings. Now, players like Enterprise, Ubico, ALD, and Alpha City are some of the bigger names in this space. Some of the larger players like ALD and Alpha City have fleets closer to 5,000 and above. And increasingly, leasing companies are also specifically focused on not only car sharing, but within corporate car sharing, they're focused on electric car sharing. So for instance, Arval has partnered with NG and AL with ChargePoint. Again, a big trend driving growth and acceptance in the space. So the expectation is that corporate car sharing would become more integral to the comprehensive portfolio of corporate mobility services offered to customers, particularly as the market starts to move towards multimodal solutions and corporate mass solutions. Now, the next slide looks at the whole concept of corporate ride-hailing or ground transport. Now, what we found is that over the last year, ride-hailing operators had a more focused target toward the B2B segment in order to some extent make up for the revenues lost with decline in demand from the B2C segments. Companies like Lyft, companies like Uber, FreeNow offer a corporate SaaS platform that allows employees to manage their ground transportation needs. Companies are also coming up with a number of innovative solutions post the pandemic. So for instance, Uber launched its employee group rides that leverages their existing rideshare technology to match employees from the same company. Cabify, another ride-sharing company, also launched Groupon, which is a shared route service between employees, which allows them to link trips to the same point of origin or destination. Now, there are other business models as well brought to the market by companies like Get, which is more of an online car service marketplace. And it's quite comprehensive in its offering in the sense that it lets the employees book from multiple providers through a single platform. In the future, the expectation is that we will see greater integration of the ground transport platform with travel management companies like Concur and Amadeus. And this will enable a higher scale of operation and will allow you to target a broader customer base. Another trend here is that we're starting to see a combination of business and leisure trips, leisure as we've termed it. That's increasingly becoming more accepted and is more commonplace with corporates. So we're starting to see also a wider range of ground transport solutions specifically targeted at this market and inclusive of such trips. And increasingly, this service as well is becoming integrated with corporate mass. Now, the next segment looks at corporate carpooling. Now, excuse me. Now, when we talk about corporate carpooling, over the last few years, we've seen that there have been significant technology advancements that is improving this business model. So platforms today can automatically match employees traveling to work together from the same region, in the same direction as a driver or passenger. And additionally, this service can be provided in the form of a white label platform or as an app. So it can be very easily customized for organizations. Now, granted, with COVID, demand for this solution took a bit of a dip because of the restrictions with social distancing. We saw adoption rates amongst new users flatline a little bit. However, companies are starting to evolve in order to adapt to the new situation. So what they're starting to do is bring in more stringent regulation norms that kind of get around this constraint. So today you can still access a corporate car share vehicle, but you might have only two passengers in the vehicle. So one passenger sitting up in the front seat and another in the back seat. Additionally, you wear masks. You have regular access to regular sanitization, which has helped allaying a lot of the concerns around this using this model. And with that, we see the market is slowly starting to reemerge.
Shwetha, you still have 3 to 4 minutes.
Okay, thanks for the heads up. We'll keep to the time. Now, keeping in mind that this model is slowly starting to take off, you have companies like Faxi, which is part of the Toyota Kinto Group, that is successfully helping organizations incentivize access to this model. So they basically link using the service to getting access to preferential parking spots, which encourages employees to get on the program. And they've had a lot of success in the UK with this model. Now, the next slide looks at the demand responsive market. Now, demand responsive is traditionally a model that sits somewhere between public transport and ride-hailing, both in terms of the convenience as well as in terms of the cost. One of the biggest advantage is that it gives organizations significant cost savings because it works on dynamic routing and dispatch model. So it can cost effectively group and transfer employees moving in the same direction while optimizing routes. Now, we're starting to see a huge influx of corporate mobility solutions in this space as well. We're seeing DRT operators like Zelo, Shuttle, Padam, and Kuti offer a range of customized corporate DRT solutions. There was a pilot that was recently run in Barcelona that also gave some feedback on how this is being perceived by the employees and employers. So on average, this is very, very well, they've seen high adoption rates. It's very well accepted by employees. They have an average willingness to pay a price point of about €2 per journey per employee, which means that there is a significant business case to expand into here. Now, the next slide basically looks at mobility budgets. Effectively, it's a predetermined employee travel allowance that can be spent across any mobility modes. Now, we've talked about it in detail in the previous session, so I won't go into the definition. But what we are seeing is that there are a significant amount of market drivers opening up the opportunity here. So we're seeing a regulatory shift. For instance, Belgium implemented the Cash for Car Mobility Initiative in 2018 and introduced advanced mobility budget regulations in 2019. France mandated that any organization with more than 200 employees offer access to alternative mobility solutions. We're starting to see traditional leasing and rental companies like Alphabet, ALD, Arval, and Europcar begin to offer mobility budgets as an alternative for company cars. And increasingly, we're starting to see a convergence between mobility budgets itself and corporate mass solutions. Now, this slide basically gives a snapshot of some of the key players in Netherlands, which is one of the most advanced markets for mobility budgets indeed. The next slide talks a little bit about corporate mass. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing a convergence between mobility budgets and corporate mass. So corporate mass essentially brings together all available mobility modes on a single platform, and it can be offered to the employees as part of this budget. Public transport is integrated into this model apart from different other mobility modes, and typically tends to be central to the overall solution. Now, we're seeing service providers like Mobilio, Mobility, Kuti, and Wim for Business really start to take off in this space. Operators like Skedgo as well provide real-time mobility options, which help you tailor your carbon footprints. So again, making it very, very attractive for organizations to shift to this model, not only because it lets you be cost effective, but also because it helps you achieve your sustainability goals. The next slide gives a snapshot of some of the key players, the traditional stakeholders in this space, who are starting to, I would say, dramatically expand their footprint with respect to corporate mobility. So not only are we seeing new stakeholders that I talked about earlier, but we're also seeing traditional companies like leasing, rental companies, and even captive arms of OEMs, financial arms of OEMs, start to offer advanced solutions. From this chart, what is evident is that these companies are constantly innovating their solutions in order to be relevant to the new market. They are positioning themselves and evolving from traditional fuel cards, transitioning into becoming mobility service providers. For instance, Arval recently launched a new mobility service within its 360-degree mobility offer. And as part of this, they have the Arval Mobility Hub, which enables employees to choose the most suitable mobility option for their journey. And this could range from car, from bike to micromobility solutions, anything that is needed to provide seamless connectivity for the entire journey at the tap of the finger. So again, the key takeaway here is that not only are we seeing a huge amount of innovation come through from non-traditional corporate stakeholders, but we're also seeing the traditional market evolve and in many cases take a lead in this market development. Now, the last slide that I will end with is one that provides a snapshot of potential client perspectives towards corporate mobility. And what is clear is that increasingly there is a need for a more sophisticated, broader mobility solution and more comprehensive mobility solution, really. The market is already starting to evolve to address this need, and corporate mobility, in particular MaaS, is expected to take off within the next 2 to 3 years. And with that, I come to the end of my presentation. So
thank you.
Any questions if there are?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shwetha. Thank you very much for the insights. If you have a question for Shwetha, you can directly contact her via the tool. For the sake of timing, we need to move on. Shwetha, it was very interesting, and we will stay in touch because the future of corporate mobility is for sure an exciting one. Once again, thank you. Thank you very much.